coasting and as if to say, okay, kid, it's your turn to win this 500-mile race. It's all yours.
I'm Lou Palmer. We're here with you live from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. For some of you in flamboyant stereo, for others we're pumping magnificent mono. And if you'll lend us even half an ear, we'll bring you 360-degree coverage of the 72nd running of the Indianapolis 500.
This is IndyCar Radio on the IMS Radio Network.
If you would like to purchase a complete Indianapolis 500 race broadcast, go to IndianapolisMotorspeedway.com.
One, two, three, four.
From Belle Isle Park in Detroit, Michigan, it's time for the Verizon IndyCar Series on the Advance Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network.
I think given the circumstances, the dust still settling on the 102nd running of the Indianapolis 500, but now the focus shifts back to the battle for the 2018 Verizon IndyCar Series Championship. I'm Mark James. Good morning from beautiful Belle Isle in Detroit. Our driver analyst Anders Crone joins us, and boy, all of a sudden, Will Power got hot at just the right time, sweeping the month of May. He leads Alexander Rossi by 2 points, Joseph Newgarden by 8, Scott Dixon, Ryan Hunter-Reay, Graham Rahal, Robert Wickens, Sebastian Bourdais, all within striking distance. But most importantly for Will Power, what an incredible win and what an incredible month of May for him at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Yeah, it was just tremendous to see that change of form and fortunes for him after a rather lackluster start to the season, looking like he was already outside the championship chase. But then obviously with that win at the Grand Prix and then double points at the Indy 500, that has vaulted him back to the front again. And I think he's going to want to pick up right where he left off this weekend and just have a solid weekend. I guess that's probably going to be difficult given how many media things he's had to do over the course of the last week, but certainly for him, I think now he sees, man, I'm back in the championship hunt, now I can chase, and I think being back in the car is probably going to be a bit of a sigh of relief for him because of all the duties he's had over the last week.
10th in points going into the month of May. He piled them up for sure. In typical willpower fashion, I mean, the guy is just piling up win after win after win. Some of the numbers, just they're becoming staggering. Most wins in a season, he's tied among the all-time leaders. He had 6 wins back in 2011. Most consecutive wins, he's had consecutive wins 3 times in his career in 12, 13, and 14. Most seasons with at least 1 win, that's 12 now. Consecutive seasons with 1 or more, 12. He's 9th all-time now in wins. And in terms of a championship chase, he was the runner-up and 10th in 2010, 11, and 12. If you remember, in 2013, he finished 4th in points, but he won the season finale in Fontana. And after that is essentially what vaulted him to the championship in 2014. And he wanted the Indy 500 so badly, the only thing he had not accomplished in his career. And needless to say, a lot of emotion came exploding out of willpower in victory lane at Indy.
Yeah, it was brilliant. It was just one of those sort of things. And he said even afterwards that he couldn't have finished his career off, whenever that is, without an Indy 500 win and feeling 100% accomplished. So I think it was just a sigh of relief for him, because he's challenged for it for so many years now. He's been with Team Penske for so many years and been in contention. So I think it was just a complete sigh of relief for him to finally be able to do the job. But I think as it pertains to his championship chances, his biggest thing is he tends to have these up and down seasons where his peaks are just incredible, but then he also has some pretty low valleys. And I think that the key to the rest of this season for him is going to be, when he has a bit of trouble, how can he keep consistent? How can he just grab a top 5 finish when that's all he can get out of it? And I think then he can really grab another championship. And so I think that's going to be the key to it, is damage limitation when he's not on such a strong weekend.
Well, as Takuma Sato inferred during the month of May, and we talked about it a bit, you really don't fully enjoy the spoils of being an Indy 500 champion maybe until the season has concluded and all of the off-season things leading into the following season. And so with the championship chase now back to being front and center, let's not forget, I mean, we're in a pretty brutal stretch that goes back a ways for these drivers and these teams. And not only do they have a doubleheader weekend, but then they got to load up, head to the Lone Star State of Texas, and then they'll get a sigh of relief, get a breathe a little bit after the race June 9th at Texas Motor Speedway. But I'll tell you what, some pretty weary race teams right now.
Well, I tell you, everyone's talking about how the Indy 500 is a double points weekend. So is this.
Right.
We have 2 races here. So this is every bit as important in the points chase as the Indy 500 is. And obviously that's what vaulted Graham Rahal into contention last year after that huge double win. He was in the mid-pack or some, maybe top 10 in the points, and then he got the double win, and suddenly he was in championship contention here. So this is a huge weekend, and kind of what will be interesting to see is, will the same patterns pick up right where we left off from St. Pete and Long Beach? Will it be Alexander Rossi yet again at the front? Will it be or will it be someone else? Will Robbie Wickens get his first win? I mean, those are the sort of guys that we're really looking for. What can they do here? And obviously a just crazy bumpy track here at Belle Isle, and it seems to get worse every single year. I actually did a bit of a track walk earlier and noticed just they've tried to grind down quite a few of the spots here on the track, some of the bumpier spots, but still just such a bumpy track. So it's very, very important to get that ultimate compliance for the car. They run the cars very, very softly sprung here, and I think from looking at it and the way that Alexander Rossi has driven his car, I wouldn't be surprised if this will suit him and his driving style very, very well.
He'll move out to the course for the races Saturday, Sunday, and for qualifying as well. But for now, he's helping to handle the chores on pit road. We welcome back to the racetrack and to Belle Isle. Say good morning to Jay Query.
Morning to you, Mark. Good to be here in Belle Isle. And right now, it is a warm start to the morning. The ambient temperature 76 degrees, but the track temperature at 84. Now, that varies a little bit depending on where you go throughout this course here on the island. But the humidity is something that is to keep an eye on as well, because the air does feel a little bit thick. There's a very slight breeze that moves here along pit road. It's a busy pit road this morning. That's not necessarily because of the fact that there's a serious amount of activity going on right now. Teams just doing those install laps, preserving those tires perhaps just a little bit, because keep in mind, 2 different events this weekend. But it's a busy pit road also because the sports car series sharing the bill with the Verizon IndyCar series this weekend. And so as a result of that, a lot more teams with a lot more gear here on this pit road. We see circumstances similar to that in Long Beach. I'm watching over right now that Team Penske pit. They are simply sitting and waiting, doing that install lap, and then I think it'll be a couple of minutes, Mark, before we see a flurry of activity here in this first practice session at Belle Isle.
2.35 miles in length, 14 turns, 5 left and 9 right. The width is between 35 and 60 feet, depending on where you are. Over the years, going back to 1992, when CART was here, until 2001, IRL here, 07 and 08. And then IndyCar Series returned in 2012. And Anders Krohn, let's face it, very bumpy, very rough, at times a very unforgiving racetrack. But it has been a work in progress. There's been some alterations to the course and some massive improvements made over the past few years.
Yeah, they have indeed. But by virtue of it basically all being concrete, and obviously the ground moves a lot here out on the island, there's still a tremendous amount of bumps here. And so as a driver, physically, nothing beats you up quite like a place like this or Toronto, where you're just constantly being beat up inside the car. Just very, very important to put some padding on your elbows, on your knees, to make sure they don't beat around inside the car, because that a few laps into the run, it can be very, very difficult. And from a car compliance perspective, I think that's the most fascinating thing about this is you need to find a car that really rides over the bumps very well to keep contact with the surface at all times. If you run a car aerodynamically, you always want to run the car as stiff as you possibly can to get it as low to the ground as possible and make the underside of the car work as well as possible. But around a place like this, the mechanical compliance becomes more important through the corners than the aerodynamic downforce levels become. So therefore, you'll notice just how much suspension movement there is in the car here. If you go back to a place like Indianapolis Motor Speedway, you can barely see the suspension or the A-arms, the wishbones moving at all. But here, you'll actually see a lot of movement, both front and rear. And that's just the teams really focusing on how do we have maximum contact pads for the tire and the ground at all times here, because that'll give you grip, that'll give you compliance, and it'll give you drivability.
A couple of long straightaways providing passing opportunities. Would we say that at the exit of turn number 2 and the straightaway that leads to turn 3, and then what off of 6 into 7 would be the best passing opportunities? Those are the longest, straightest portions of the race course.
Yeah, unquestionably. So it's so important to have a good run through 1 and 2. That'll set you up for 3. But we've seen so many incidents in turn 3, as Charlie Kimball at the moment, speaking of turn 3, he's spun it around there. Very, very bumpy there. And especially on the inside of the track where there's no rubber. So easy to lock up your tires. And it's just it's almost a bit like St. Pete turn 1, where it's so easy to get drawn into this, oh my God, I can overtake 3 cars in one go. And then you realize, oh man, the corner is just tightening up on me here. And in the case of Charlie Kimball, I think he just grabbed a bit too much curb there. So I think he'll be reporting back to his crew, talking to them about the compliance of the car.
The Dale Coyne race team, a new driver this weekend, talented young American, getting an opportunity in that 19 machine. Let's hear from Dale Coyne by welcoming in Nick Yeoman.
Yes, Mark James, that driver you talk about is 20-year-old Santino Ferrucci from Connecticut, who makes his debut. And Dale, first practice session for him. How important is today, 2 sessions for him to get up to speed with this race car and with this racetrack?
Well, it's a short track time here. It's a track he's never been on, probably the bumpiest track in the world he's ever been on. So there's a lot to learn today. So we'll put him out early, just let him get some laps and get used to the place.
This is a very talented young American, 20 years old. He's a test driver for Haas and F1. How did this all come together that you were able to put him in this car this weekend?
When Pietro got hurt, we heard from a lot of drivers around the world, and he was one of them, called not necessarily about Indy, but maybe about some road course opportunities. So it worked out well. This is an off weekend. He runs a full season of GP2, which is always with the Formula One races, and this is an off weekend for Formula One, so it was a natural fit here.
How tough is it to put a driver in for a debut weekend mid-season here? I mean, is he getting up to speed? Obviously, he's not going to learn anybody's names in just one weekend.
It's tough. I mean, we did a test at Putnam Park, which is just kind of a place to shake a guy down, so this is his first taste of a real racetrack, but he'll be fine.
All right, appreciate it. That's Dale Coyne. Of course, 2 cars this weekend. He's got a very talented teammate in Sebastian Bourdais that he can lean on, but 20-year-old Santino Ferrucci, Jake Query from Connecticut, debut weekend here in the Verizon IndyCar Series.
And you mentioned that other machine, the Sealmaster of Sebastian Bourdais. He sits right now on pit road. They just are taking a look at the springs. Also have the nose of the car off and look like they were perhaps giving an examination underneath just to make sure. Looks like they might have been checking the brakes, but it is no cause for panic. Just this is the beauty of this session. Everybody kind of has time to evaluate, go over everything. Sebastian Bourdais now, they start to put the nose of that car on. So what was so far kind of a fractured session for Sebastian Bourdais, I think that's about to change, and we're about to see that other Dale Coyne car go out here onto this course.
Back to Ferrucci, you talk about Putnam Park. That road course is in Putnam County, 30-plus miles west of Indianapolis. Some of you short track fans might be familiar with Lincoln Park Speedway in Putnamville, which is not too far away. But a lot of Indy Lights teams, Pro Mazda teams, F2000 teams have tested there at Putnam Park. You've been in a race car there. I'm guessing that's more just to get him comfortable in the race car and getting familiar with the tools and the settings.
Well, I'm laughing because it's quite the stark contrast from the Monaco Grand Prix that he raced last weekend in Formula 2.
Surrounded by cattle by and large.
Exactly, to Putnam Park and now to the bumpiest track, as Dale Coyne said, probably in the world. That is quite the contrast in the span of a week there for Santino. But obviously he's shown tremendous progress in F2 and, great to see him on the Haas team. But I think he's going to have an eye-opener here on the contrast of just how difficult and how different this type of track is as well as this type of car. So I think if he can adapt to this, he can adapt to just about anything. And even though the Monaco Grand Prix is a street circuit, compared to this track, it's a bit like a pool table.
Sebastian Bourdais, a two-time winner here, 75 points back. One of the big names that not around to the finish at the Indianapolis 500. That race, because of the combination of the elements and the handling of that new aero kit, caused some issues. There were some pretty popular names there that weren't around for the finish, like Kanan and Danica Patrick and Sebastian Bourdais and Elio Castro Neves.
Yeah, it was, and I think it was just all down to the fact of how difficult it was to stay with people in dirty air, and so I think there were times when they maybe just got a little too aggressive, wanting to push the issue a little too early, and they got caught out, and I think that's what was so intriguing about the 500 this year, is just how difficult it was for everyone, and that included veterans as well as rookies, and so I think from a racing perspective, certainly more difficult to make overtakes, but man, oh man, did it take a lot of patience and a lot of setting people up to make it happen.
You think it's tough for these guys to get back into championship and full race mode? I mean, even if you didn't win the Indianapolis 500, let's face it, your time is not your own throughout most of that month, and I think everyone has to kind of catch their collective breaths and get refocused for this weekend.
I think it's quite refreshing, actually, for quite a lot of these drivers, just kind of getting away from all the media hustle and bustle of Indy, and also just keep in mind how different this is. You have 3 weeks at Indy to fine-tune every little bit, and here you have 2 45-minute practice sessions, then you're into qualifying. So it's a very, very stark contrast, and certainly you need to offload here with a good car. You don't have a lot of time to work on your setup.
You mentioned one corner being somewhat similar to St. Pete. Is there anywhere that this series runs in terms of a street course during the course of the season that we can kind of make a comparison to, or because of the fact that this one's so bumpy and rough, it's kind of it has characteristics that are all its own? It's
such a unique beast. I think the only one is the brake zone for 3, and even that's not very similar to St. Pete. It's just in visual impact, it's a bit similar how it's this wide track, and then you get down to the corner and it narrows right up. I think probably turn 12, turn 13 are a little bit like turn 5, 6 at Long Beach, but then again the grip level and surface is completely different. And then you have the mid section of the track, turn 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's just unlike anything else. It's this polished concrete where there's no grip whatsoever, and even all the rubber you try to lay down, it doesn't provide you any grip whatsoever. So it really is a unique track.
From 7 all the way around to, I think, more or less turn 2. That's not for the faint of heart. That's a very difficult section of the racetrack, and I think one of the longest difficult sections of any course that we run on during the year.
Yeah, it is indeed, and it just doesn't give you any room to breathe whatsoever. I've only driven a Cadillac CTS-V around this place, and even that was a bit of a workout, because basically the only time you're truly going straight is in the run down from turn 2 to turn 3. Everywhere else, you're constantly working with the car, setting it up for the next corner, upshifting, downshifting, working on your paddle shifters, whatever you have. So there's very, very little room to breathe here, and so it's definitely going to be one of those race weekend that where the strongest physically fit drivers are going to have a big advantage.
Sports cars running here this weekend, along with the Verizon IndyCar Series, as we see Marco Andretti narrowly miss a squirrel, very nimble on his feet to avoid getting plucked by that 98 machine. But so how much will the grip level go up? Do they hope a lot over the course of the weekend?
Yeah, they certainly hope a lot, and also that's partially going to change from the IMSA race that's going to go on tomorrow. I think that's a full 2-hour race, and also during the mid part of the day today, I think there's an hour and a half practice session for them. So there will go rubber down. It's just a different type of rubber to the Firestone. So I think that's the biggest thing here. And again, the biggest issue with this track is because it's so bumpy, you'll never have kind of one consistent streak of rubber laid down on the ground. It's just kind of these patches of rubber. So it'll never fully grip up like a road course does. So it's, you kind of always plan around this place just being super slippery from beginning to end.
Charlie Kimball, the early leader, a minute 19, 4.872. Jordan King back in the car for Ed Carpenter. Ed Jones, Wickens, Veach, Powers, Sato, Chilton, Andretti, and Hunter Ray, the top 10. Still waiting for Hinch, Newgarden, Rahal, and Dixon to put their cars to the paces. A couple of drivers we want to touch upon. How about Ed Carpenter? I know he said it in the post-race. Maybe in a week or so I'll be happier. But, you don't go through all of the things that they go through to finish second in the 500. But still, starting on pole, he was in contention all day long. And that's a track, quite frankly, where Lady Luck has not smiled on him a lot over the years. So I think now Ed Carpenter can get some satisfaction over what was a very productive race day.
I think so, but it's just crazy to think that we listened to his post-race interview, and he almost just sounded like he'd got out of the office at 5 p.m. on a Friday. Mm-hmm. That's how calm and quiet and collected he was. And I think it just shows how strong he is kind of mentally during the course of these races, how he doesn't get riled up. And I think that's why he stays in contention during the course of these races. But it also just shows that really the only thing that matters at the Indy 500 is winning. And I think that's why we saw some of these veterans get caught out, because they were so aggressive in trying to just be in contention for the win that they were almost accepting of the fact that, well, if I'm in the wall now, it is what it is, because the only thing that matters here is winning.
Top 5 finish a year ago, not to be this year at the 500 for Ed Jones. Had a pretty hard hit. Had to go to Methodist for a look-see, concussion protocol, but they thought they might have to put him through that. But when all is said and done, Ed Jones cleared to drive and is participating this weekend. A little harder hit than it looked initially when we saw it.
Yeah, and it was just kind of the rotation of inertia that slammed him into the wall that I think did it. It wasn't just kind of a side impact on the wall. The car was still rotating as it slammed into the wall. So, no, that was a good hit for sure. And I think just a casual reminder to everyone onlooking that there's really no such thing as a small hit on an oval.
A year ago, Graham Rahal swept this weekend. He would like for a similar fate this weekend. Rahal is just 60 points back coming into the race today. Back to pit road and Jake Query.
Part of what Graham Rahal did a year ago, if we recall, is when he went back, conserved tires just a little bit, because Anders Krohn can perhaps elaborate on this, but it becomes very important when you have, of course, 2 races in the same weekend. Now, you have this practice session, and then you start getting into qualifying the race and etc. The way that Firestone distributes it, that becomes key. Now, each rookie team, of course, gets an extra set of tires, but there are 9 sets of the primary Firestone Firehawk tires. Those are the black tires. Those are the tires that have a little bit more longevity on them, but they take a little bit longer to get into that really good grip once you put them on your car and go out. But 9 sets of primary tires. Those red-ringed softer compound tires, again, give you a little bit more immediate grip, but they start to go away a little bit faster. They're already broken in, if you will. Each team will have 4 of those. And then in terms of the rain tires, and we certainly hope that does not come into play, but you do see from time to time that they are transported. A lot of times they'll put the rain tires on those cars when they transport them back and forth. The rain tires, each team will get 5 sets of those, but we, of course, hope that that's not going to come into play over the course of this weekend. But tire preservation and making sure, Mark, that they are good to go is going to be important when you have these back-to-back races.
Anders?
Yeah, no, it is indeed. And I think especially around a place like this, we might see a really big delta between the red and the black tires. And just that little bit extra grip from the Firestone Red will just enable you and the contact patch just to get a little bit better in between every single bump here. So I don't think we'll see any takers this practice session on the Firestone Reds, but I think next session we'll probably see everyone experiment with one set, and just crucial for them not to abuse that too much, because as Jake said, you only have 4 of the Firestone Reds. So whatever set of Firestone Reds you go out on in the next practice session, you want to make sure that you only do a short run on them so you still have something for the race.
68.4208. Marco Andretti goes to P1, leapfrogging over his teammate as 68.5978. Talking about Ryan Hunter-Reay as we go back to pit road and check in with Nick Yeoman.
Yeah, Mark, of course, you talked about Will Power in the magical month of May that he had, and with that thrill of victory, of course, comes the agony of defeat, and nowhere was that more evident than in James Hinchcliffe's Aero Pit, as, of course, he missed the 102nd running of the Indianapolis 500. The mayor of Hinchtown, though, back behind the wheel of a car this weekend for Schmidt-Peterson Motorsports. That timing stand looks a little different, though, this weekend. Lena Gade was the engineer for that car for the first 5 races of the year. She departed the team and taking over on that timing stand is Will Anderson here this weekend. Anderson's a guy that's been farmed out from the Meyershank Racing team that fields that car for Jack Harvey, so still unclear who's going to field or engineer this 5-car full-time, because there are still a few more races that Jack Harvey will be competing in this season. But Will Anderson, an experienced engineer, getting the shot mark to jump on the timing stand for James Hinchcliffe as that team just tries to kind of put the month of May behind them and the disappointment of winning the 102nd, missing out on the 102nd Indy 500.
This needs to be a big weekend for Hinch, whether he has a new engineer or not, and we see him take a wild ride into turn number 7.
Man.
But he's 99 points back. He needs to score a couple podium finishes.
Yeah, I mean, really his only goal for the rest of the year needs to be to win the races. I think that's the only thing he can hope for, and if that ends up being, putting him back in championship contention, good, but really the only thing he needs to care about at this point in time is winning races. And it's funny to think, Lena Gate's such an accomplished engineer in her own right, but it just comes to show how important the chemistry is within the team. You can have the most talented individuals you want on a team, but if they're not all on the same page and buy into the same philosophy as a team, it just won't work out. So I think it's just another crucial reminder that whoever you have on your team need to buy into your philosophy, otherwise it won't work out, regardless of their personal merits.
Not a lot of time for teams to get prepped. At 12:05 Eastern is when we'll throw the checkers on this session, and then another practice session at 3:10 Eastern this afternoon. Then we'll go qualifying at 10:55 tomorrow before race number 1 at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So we're running through this first session as we speak, and Graham Rahal has gone to P1 at 68.0822 as preparations continue for the raceway at Belle Isle Park.
Firestone presents Legendary Drives. The scariest thing in sports is a left turn, taking it over 220 miles an hour. Turn 1 at the Indy 500 demands everything a tire's got, putting 2.5 G's on them for 4 seconds. Once it's over, they only have to do it 199 more times. And if Firestone tires are so dependable they can handle turn 1, they'll handle any turn you need to make. Whatever you drive, drive a Firestone, the tire that drives IndyCar legends.
From the Firestone broadcast booth at Belle Isle, this is the Verizon IndyCar Series.
Looky, Graham Rahal last year swept the weekend, and just like that, 68.0822. Not worth much right now other than a huge boost of confidence for that race team, and we've talked about it before. Ed Carpenter, 3 poles at the Indianapolis 500. You go back to Allenzer Jr. and his dominance at Long Beach, winning 6 times there. Elio Castroneves and Alexander Rossi, their records at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and Graham Rahal coming off sweeping a doubleheader weekend. Some guys just like some racetracks.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true, and Graham Rahal certainly the case. Watching his onboards a few moments ago, he's basically driving it like a rallycross car. And so I think, we need to potentially look at getting him a ride in rallycross as well. But no, he just has the feel for the place and a really good flow for it. And you can just see he just lets the car dance. And it's a very, very important thing around a bumpy place like this to not kind of get stuck in the bumps, to just kind of let the car float on top of it and kind of skim on top of everything. And I think when I look at the way he's generating momentum across the top of the surface, him and Alexander Rossi actually look quite similar in that regard, how they're just kind of floating on top of the surface and making it really, really dance.
A couple of cars banging off the outside wall. We see the number 4, Mateus Lace, take a wide swing, and the left side's made a little contact there. But we also have some of the wildlife here on the island that's making things interesting for drivers in this practice session. We've had a couple of squirrels and a couple of narrow misses out of the race course.
I think it's the same squirrel. I think it's a suicidal squirrel that's out there just running about the place. So it's generating some havoc, and that's not in an easy break zone either. That's into turn 7, which in its own right's a difficult break zone, and then having to avoid the wildlife. Yeah, that's no fun right there. But yeah, that squirrel may want to look to just climbing up in a tree and watching from there.
Back to pit road and Jake Query.
Alexander Rossi has brought his machine in, that number 27 Andretti Autosport. They're going to make a spring adjustment on the front of the car. The team has the familiar Napa Auto Parts shirts on, but the paint scheme is a little bit different if you're looking for Alexander Rossi. He has the blue and the green of Ruoff Home Mortgage, which, of course, came on board with Andretti Autosport a year ago with Takuma Sato's car that won the Indianapolis 500. They went ahead with the Indianapolis 500, of course, last weekend, and we're on the car of Carlos Munoz. So that paint scheme very familiar if you watched Munoz at Indianapolis, but now it shifts over to Alexander Rossi's car. And Alexander Rossi sits Nick Yeoman. They're taking a look at that spring adjustment, and then before too long, we should see that Ruoff Home Mortgage of Alexander Rossi, Nick, out on the course.
Yeah, Jake, and he's not the only Andretti Autosport car with a different look, different paint scheme, different sponsor this weekend, as Marco Andretti has a pink, silver, and white look with Auto Nation, a new sponsorship on that car. Auto Nation's been involved with Jack Harvey and then Meyershank Racing Team throughout the last couple of years that they've been running part-time. So good to see some other sponsorships that you talked about that have gotten involved, like Ruoff Home Mortgage for the Indianapolis 500 carrying over to this weekend in Detroit. As Mark Janes, some of these cars look a little bit different here in Belle Isle this weekend.
Since you stepped out of the cockpit, I'm more familiar with the business side of motorsports, of course. And we've talked about this, how these race teams have kind of had to reinvent marketing and promotion and sponsorships and doing these things on a regional, sometimes rotating. Everyone would love to have that one main primary sponsor to carry all throughout the course of the season. But let's face it, if you can sew up 3 or 4 different sponsorships in the course of the year and get your whole season covered in segments, I think the end goal is the same, to get most of the season covered.
It is indeed, and I think the Verizon IndyCar Series and all the teams involved have done a great job in not just staying relevant, but kind of becoming relevant, as it were, as it pertains to sponsorships like that. So I think they've done a great job in really adapting to the needs of different corporations now. Again, to your point, that there's a lot less of the same kind of huge sponsorship dollars from large corporations out there. So yeah, you're quite right. It's more about finding those kind of one-off sponsors that keep coming back. But what is cool to see, though, is these one-off race sponsors come back for year after year after year. That's kind of the proof in the pudding that it's working well, and certainly great to see. And Takuma Sato as well, Fifth Third Bank on his car. Obviously, Graham Rahal had those as a primary a couple of years ago, or I think last year. So no, that's awesome to see. And what I am thankful for, though, is I know last year we had just about every single car in the field was blue and white.
That's right.
So luckily we don't run into that same pickle this year.
And let's face it, technology has made this a little easier. Some teams still go through the painstaking process of repainting those cars when those sponsorships change. But, boy, technology has allowed them to turn sponsorships over in a relatively short amount of time by wrapping these race cars.
Yeah, and I was talking to Michael Young, actually, who obviously is quite the expert in these types of wraps. And he seems to think that a wrap on a race car, the entire wrap, to wrap the entire thing, is only about 5 to 6 pounds. So it's way, way, way lighter than paint, and obviously a lot more versatile than paint. And now, with as flexible as these things are, you can really flex them around any type of surface that you want. And I know that was the obstacle in the past when you had these really thick vinyls, is that they would start to bubble at the edges, and it was difficult to form it. But now the technology has come a really, really long way, and so vinyl, yeah, definitely the way to go.
With this a doubleheader weekend and 2 relatively short practice sessions in terms of preparation, we go qualifying tomorrow and then race the same day. So I'm just curious. We're looking for a race setup here, or are we looking for a qualifying setup?
At this point in time, I think everyone's just looking for overall compliance, because the compliance that you're going to find now is going to be the same whether it's qualifying or race. I think in the next session, once they get the Firestone Reds out, they're going to experiment with some more aggressive cambers on the cars, maybe going a little bit stiffer to see if they can get a little bit more out of the downforce on the Firestone Reds. But I think at this point in time, it's just overall compliance. How do we get this car as drivable as possible? Because this is one of those places where the more drivable the car is, the more you as a driver can get out of it, and therefore you're going to go quicker.
An update from Pit Road with Jake Query.
Actually, just had an observation and a question for Anders. Anders, I'm watching as these teams are coming in. Now, obviously, they're not doing a full stint just yet in this session, but the tires look pretty good, the Firestone Firehawks. Everybody going out on those primary blacks. After they go out and do a couple of circuits, and again, we're not getting into the point where they're really getting a lot of wear on them, but so far, they look pretty good here. Now, this is a relatively green or clean track because it's the start of the weekend. But, and I had mentioned earlier that they get 5 sets of the wet rain tires. I misspoke and apologize. It's actually 7. We hope that doesn't come into play. But my question for you, Anders, is whenever we have these double bill weekends, when you have sports cars out here that are going to be laying down a rubber compound that is different than the Firestone Firehawk that these cars are used to, how much of an effect does that have on the grip of these tires, and how many circuits does it take the field to go through to lay down then and get that familiar rubber that is more agreeable with the Firestones?
Well, it can greatly change, and it all depends on what type of rubber is laid down. Obviously, in the IMSA category, it's mainly Continental tire that's being put down, so that has a completely different compound compared to the Firestone, and so it definitely takes a little while, and I think that's often why we see Group 2 in qualifying go so much quicker than Group 1, just because then there is that base of the Firestone that's gone down. So there's no sort of clear-cut, here's how many laps it takes, but certainly there's a reason why these teams and drivers want to wait as long as they possibly can in a qualifying session, is to let every car do as many laps as possible before them on the Firestone to have that kind of compliance from the tire compound as much as possible.
Any chance this place is so rough that some of these guys are entertaining the thoughts of a mouth guard while they're in the? I wouldn't
be surprised, man. Gosh. I mean, I remember specifically driving in Toronto and just feeling beat up, and this place looks and feels way, way, way more abrasive than Toronto. So I think I would, but the biggest thing is, there's no way you get out of the cockpit after 45 minutes here without a headache or without some sort of bruising. So I think it's just a matter of kind of, having some Tylenol ready and being able to pop those and really just conserving yourself between the sessions.
Nick Yeoman.
Ricardo Nault is a strategist for Graham Rahal, who, of course, swept the weekend. Ricardo, you guys found something a year ago, an incredibly successful weekend here in Detroit. I know the aero kit has changed, but do you guys feel confident that same magic that you found last year is going to translate here?
Well, you never really know how the magic will transfer, but right now Graham's P1 in the United Rentals Honda. He's feeling pretty strong, happy with the car, so I think we can make it happen.
What do you chalk it up to? I mean, this racetrack, him as a driver, you as a team, how do you find that magic in a place like this?
Yeah, I don't know. It all comes together, right? You just find the right setup, and the boys pretty happy with the car, and like I said, the Honda motor's strong.
It's been a strong start to the weekend so far. Mark James is Graham Rahal, the only driver this season that has finished in the top 10 in all 6 races, comes to a racetrack that he really, really likes.
And continues P1, 68-01-91. It's a doubleheader weekend here on Belle Isle.
Firestone presents Legendary Drives. It was the 1969 Indy 500 when Mario Andretti's crew couldn't get his right rear tire off. He had no choice but to drive on it the whole race, still finishing with a checkered flag and a drink of milk. Now that's legendary. And if Firestone tires are so dependable they can take Mario 500 grueling IndyCar miles, just imagine how far they'll take you. Whatever you drive, drive a Firestone, the tire that drives IndyCar legends.
From the Firestone broadcast booth at Belle Isle, this is the Verizon IndyCar Series.
Sebastian Bourdais into the 17s. Takuma Sato at 63.6732, the record from 1 year ago. We're going to get close to that?
Man, that's difficult to say. I didn't think that on street and road courses we'd get anywhere near this year compared to last year with the reduction in downforce, but they're going so much quicker down the straights now that, they have been able to. And obviously at the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg, they set the lap record. So wouldn't be surprised if we get into the same. But tell you, as we have Rene Binder in the wall.
Yep, Rene Binder, an issue for him. It looks like he's put it into the tire barrier in a pretty precarious position, and that is going to bring out the red flag. So the session comes to a halt while they'll go out and retrieve the 32 of Rene Binder.
And I tell you, that's turn 11, I believe, unless I'm mistaken. And that's exactly where James Hinchcliffe got taken out a couple of years ago by a piece of debris, or a piece of asphalt, rather, that he went over and slammed him into the wall. So very easily done there. It's a bit of a cambered corner, and then suddenly you lose the camber. So if you're slightly offline there, or slightly outside the rubber, then it'll just send you right into the wall. And that's almost certainly, this is turn 11. So you can see just how much steering input Scott Dixon's having to put in, and still running so close to the wall there. Oh, actually,
he brushed
the wall. So very, very difficult corner. It's a bit, in a way, similar to turn 9 in St. Petersburg, which has this big, almost fishbowl feeling in the middle of the corner. But then you go over this big crest, and if you haven't rotated the car properly before you exit that bowl, you're going to go into the wall.
Relatively short straight leading to that turn, and it looks like that the AMR safety crew is going to get him refired. He's going to be able to drive that back to pit road, and because of the fact he'd scrubbed off a lot of speed, when the handling broke loose on that race car, it appears as though the damage was fairly minimal.
And he loses it on entry, actually. He just gets a little loose there, clips the curb, and then straight into the wall. And the biggest worry for him right now is not necessarily his car, but more the fact that he never took his hands off the wheel. And I saw very sharp wheel movements. I wouldn't be surprised if he's, if not injured his wrist, then at least put some pain into it.
So, red flag on the course for Rene Binder. Bourdais, as we mentioned, he's in the 117. Scott Dixon now with the 117s. Ray Hall, Rossi, Hunter-Reay, the top 5. Newgarden, Andretti, Kanaan, Pagenaud, and Sato, the top 10. We'll revisit the points now. Alexander Rossi just a couple of points behind Will Power. Joseph Newgarden is 8 back. Scott Dixon, 25 back. Ryan Hunter-Reay, 57 points back. And we talked to Ryan Hunter-Reay in the post-race after the 500. We asked him about the double-paying points weekend. He said, this is the 500. We don't. Maybe we'll feel better about it when we get to Detroit, but that is again the one race of the year, and rightfully so. They don't think much about the championship. Although, let's face it, if Will Power holds on to win the championship, he's going to point to the month of May as the month that turned it around for him.
No, for sure. But I think the Indy 500 is so powerful, they almost wouldn't even need a single point in order to teams and drivers still being motivated to
make that trade, wouldn't they?
100% they would. So, no question. If I was a driver, would I care about points in the 500? Not at all. Not in the slightest.
Now, those LED displays, they've been gone for a while, and I know you spend a lot of time in the paddock. Going to see those back anytime soon?
I certainly hope so, and I know they obviously upgraded to those more higher resolution panels this year, and so clearly they're still working through those issues. I thought last year and the system they had was absolutely brilliant, and I very much support the series and kind of wanting to elevate that. So really hope to get that back, because as a fan, it can sometimes be confusing when people are on different pit strategies, figuring out who's running where, or when there's lap traffic or whatnot. But those things really just help kind of illuminate. And also love the fact that you can see when people are on the push to pass.
Right.
That's probably the coolest thing, because the coolest view is when we're in the booth at Barber Motorsports Park, when they exit turn 5, that hairpin, and suddenly you see it go green and it's just blinking PP, and that means this guy's on it, he's going to go for a pass.
150 seconds total of push to pass, 15-second intervals this weekend. Need to be judicious with those, or are you going to use those for track position early on in the race?
If it's a caution-filled race, it can be so easy to just use them all up, because then you want to use it on the run down to turn 3. You'll want to use it on the run down to turn 7. And before you know it, you can very easily have used those up. So you definitely need to be smart with how you use them, both kind of in a defensive move as well as an offensive move.
So as a driver, your thoughts and impressions of just 2 45-minute sessions before we go qualifying?
It's brilliant. I love it. I know drivers and teams will strongly disagree with me, but I think less practice is better because it means that the importance of offloading with a good setup is better. I honestly think that the better drivers will come to the fore with less track time. It'll enable you, if you as a driver are slightly off your game, it means you won't have as much time to look at data and video to get yourself back up to speed. So if it were up to me, 145-minute practice session straight into qualifying.
So now we talk about that quote-unquote blank sheet of paper. We probably worn that out in terms of going into a race weekend. It's St. Petersburg, the Oval at Phoenix, the streets of Long Beach, Barber Motorsports Park, the road course at IMS, qualifying, the 500. Now here we are at Belle Isle. Even when we go to Texas, Road America, Iowa, streets of Toronto, probably not a blank sheet anymore, is it?
I think everyone's starting to gather the trends of what this car is like, and so I think they can then translate. Going into next weekend at Texas, they know, okay, so far this year we've had to do this to the car mechanically to make it work at all the different tracks, and here's the biggest difference. I think by this point they'll have it pretty well sorted. Now, it's still a big question mark who's going to be stronger than other teams because, we still haven't been able to get a solid pattern on exactly that. I mean, after Long Beach, I think all of us expected, Alexander Rossi is just going to run away with the championship this year, but then it's been so closely fought ever since.
Now, maybe we didn't have the passes for the lead that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years, but now that we've had a chance to do the post-mortem and look back, you look at some of the moves that Oriol Servia made, certainly the run that Alexander Rossi had. If you weren't totally and completely focused on the leaders, some teams prove that you can still indeed pass at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway with this aero kit.
You absolutely can, and it was all about timing other people's lack of runs. And so when someone would lose momentum, you would need to have it and need to time your run. Obviously, we saw 4, 5, 6 wide moments as we have Robert Wickens off in the runoff area.
7.
I believe is that down in turn 7.
Yep.
Yeah. Such a difficult braking zone because your car is kind of bending a little bit to the left. There's a little bit of a kink there. So as you're braking and bending to the left, the car gets offloaded and so easy to lock up. And I think that's strange there. There's no lockup for Robert Wickens. So that's a bit of a strange one. But either way, very, very difficult braking zone here as you kind of try to get your car line up as straight as possible, but then so difficult to get it slowed down.
So in terms of attacking turn number 7, as we mentioned, one of the primary passing points, they're going to have to adapt because of the changes of these aero kits. And we saw that at turn 5 in Barber earlier this year. Because of the fact that the downforce has changed on these cars, that means the braking zone has changed.
Exactly, and we saw it, turn 4 at St. Pete. I think every driver went off in the runoff area 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 times there. So that was one of the areas. Long Beach, we had turn 8 and we had turn 9. So, again, it's just because we have so much less downforce. So if you just outbrake yourself by a touch, now you don't have the downforce to kind of save you.
Let's pick out that portion of the course that we think is most important, or can you do that here? We talk about the hairpin at Long Beach, and we talk about the final turn at St. Petersburg, wanting to be fast off of those turns to take advantage of those massive straightaways. So is there a place here where you think, boy, if I'm loose here, I'm in trouble?
I think it almost goes for every single corner, to be honest, because there's no way that can save you. I mean, we saw it with Rene Binder in turn 11. Certainly, turn 12, turn 13, if you get loose there is no room for error because you're already using all the room on exits. So, no, really, this is a very unforgiving track, and I think that's what makes it so great, to be honest.
Ferrucci is 20th quick. As we mentioned off the top, Santino Ferrucci is in the car this weekend, the 19 machine. Vastly different animal than almost anything he's ever driven on.
Oh, man, I mean, just such a different car compared to both the Formula 2 car as well as the Formula 1 car that he's had a chance to sample quite a few times. I mean, completely different beast, completely different tires, obviously way less downforce this year than probably what he's been used to. But, hey, if Jordan King's been any proof of what you can do coming out of a Formula 2 car this year, then I think Santino Ferrucci should be in good shape.
We've got about 30 seconds of green time left, essentially enough for these teams to complete maybe one lap. And to that end, let's talk about Rene Binder in the 32. And let's talk about Jordan King in the 20. How difficult is it for them? First time here, first time in a race car in a while.
I think the difficult thing is just knowing where all the different bumps are. I think that's the biggest thing with coming to a new track. Yeah, they'll have had time to look at data, time to look at video and all that stuff, but they won't have had the time to kind of feel out the different bumps, exactly know where you need to place your car, and that's something that you just don't know until you get through your first practice session. So I think in this first session, it's just trying to take on as much information as possible for them.
And everybody's going to get a chance at a timed lap here, which is a good call by race control. There's only 30 seconds left in the session, and everyone took advantage of it. I mean, everyone left pit road at the same time, and it was a battle for track position and trying to buy some room.
Yeah, it was indeed. And Ed Jones and Ryan Hunter-Reay almost getting into each other in turn 3 as well. So on board here with Ed Jones. No, look at this. It's a big constipation up the road here for everyone. Man, what are they trying to do? Look at them.
Constipation.
Constipation, isn't that the right word?
Yeah, well,
yes.
They're plugged up for sure. We'll say that. Yeah, that is what it is. That's never heard that used before in motorsports broadcasting. So
I am still a Norwegian. Keep that in mind.
Anders Krone is the trendsetter here on IndyCar Radio. So, great stuff. Sebastian Bourdais goes to P1 at minute 17, 8.545. Then Dixon, then Rahal, Rossi, and Andretti the top 5. Hunter-Reay, Newgarden, Canan, Pagenaud, and Sato through position 10. Powers 11th, Chilton 12th, Kimball 13th, Matthias Leist is 14th. King is 15th, Piggott 16th, Robert Wicken 17th, Ed Jones 18th, Zach Veets 19th, Ferrucci is 20th, Hinch is 21st, Gabby Chavez 22nd, Renee Binder is 23rd. What might we see teams do differently in that second session this afternoon at 3:10?
For them, it's going to be all about just figuring out what's going to be the quickest car possible, something that might be a little uncomfortable, something that feels maybe a little bit more snappy for the drivers, a bit less compliant, but if it's anything that can give them just that little bit extra grip is what's going to help them, and then it's more just a matter of the drivers really finding the edge of the track. And every shot I see of Graham Rahal, he is flirting with that wall. He is not inches away. He's tenths of inches away from the wall, and that's really what it's all about, opening up the arc and the radius in every single corner. So
yeah,
I think the next session is going to be great, but I think qualifying is going to be electric.
Yeah, we look forward to that for sure. Here's the rest of our schedule. As we mentioned, 3:10 Eastern this afternoon, Verizon IndyCar Series practice number 2. And then a busy day tomorrow. Verizon IndyCar Series qualifying session 1 at 10:55 Eastern. And then race number 1 is set for 3 p.m. Eastern. Now, the second qualifying session is set for Sunday morning. That'll be at 10:45. It runs till 11:15. And then Verizon IndyCar Series race number 2 at 3 p.m. Eastern. You know, a few years ago we had quite a few doubleheaders. We also had, the Triple Crown. We had 3 500-mile races. Do you like the doubleheader format? Would you like to see a few more of those come back?
I kind of do, to be honest. And if you have a bad first day, it's a great way to rebound. I mean, I guess maybe somewhat unfairly, it could have a big impact on your championship. So if you have a bad weekend altogether, it can have a huge impact on your championship, much like a bad run at the Indy 500. So I guess that's probably the only downside. And I mean, I think from a driver perspective, I doubt a lot of them are loving this, because the physical abuse your body takes when you go over these bumps, I mean, it's just incredible.
Well, and we've been going at it pretty steadily since April the 7th. I mean, we were in Phoenix, and we followed it up the 15th. We went to Long Beach the 22nd. We were at Barber. Let's not forget, we had to squeeze that oval test in there that had been canceled. And then we had the road course on the 12th and the 19th qualifying, and the 20th qualifying, then the race on the 27th. We've got a doubleheader weekend. Then they got to load up, head to Texas for a race on the 9th. That is a brutal, brutal stretch.
It is, and it's just kind of going from, super fast road course to street courses to super speedways. I mean, that's not an easy transition.
Let's hear from Graham Rahal. P3 after the session he swept a year ago, Nick.
Yeah, no doubt about it, Mark Janes. A lot can change in a year in the Verizon IndyCar Series, but apparently not here at Detroit, Graham. How good does it feel to get back here where you swept the weekend, and how does that car feel after one practice?
Yeah, the car was really good. I mean, we've got the quickest car. Just didn't quite get a lap in. I think we can do a mid-7 there. So just got to put it together. We tried to get a couple runs at the end. Everybody got, balked by the yellows there a little bit. But, no, the car's really good. So hope this afternoon we'll be able to build on a little bit.
A disjointed session, Jake Query, but Graham Rahal ends the day third.
Scott Dixon is out of his machine. Let's talk about this track itself, Scott, just in terms of Anders was talking about in the past it has been very physical. Still the case where it's a pretty physical racetrack?
Yeah, there's just not a whole lot of time for rest. And, even when you have the rest, you have like kinks in the straight, and then also it's really bumpy. So it has a lot of correction going on. You don't really get too much time to chill out. The straight from 2 to 3 is probably about it. But even then, you're trying to get ready to go from about 170 miles an hour down to a first gear corner at about 45. So it's definitely a big split. But, it's a lot of fun, man. It's definitely a busy track, and the walls definitely keep you confined a bit. 2
races in the same weekend. Is that more mentally or physically demanding?
I think both. I think most of us are pretty well, trained up, I think, for situations like this. But probably being, one of the most physically demanding courses, and then having to double up, by the end of race 2, you definitely know about it. But I think it's a lot of fun. If we're here on these weekends, it's kind of cool to have 2 races and something that's unique to Detroit. We used to have a few more of them, but I really enjoy them.
Lastly, you've worn the same helmet for a long time from Troy Lee Designs, blue and orange. It perfectly matches that PNC car. You guys, you strategize that well with that sponsorship.
It's just meant to be, man. It's cool. Obviously PNC Bank have been, huge this year, especially with activation, and even out here with activation in Detroit. It's been a lot of fun. A great group of people, and hopefully we can fly the flag well for them.
Best of luck for a good weekend.
Thanks, mate.
That's Scott Dixon. Mark,
good stuff, Jake. Nick, appreciate it. Don't forget, again, 3:10 this afternoon, practice session number 2, Sebastian Bourdais, Scott Dixon, Rahal, Rossi, and Andretti, the top 5 after session 1. The director of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network and the Advanced Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network is Wally Levin, on-site engineering and production by Rick Evans. Again, thanks to Jake Query and Nick Yeoman for their job on pit road in the broadcast booth. Anders Krone joining me, Mark James. So long for now from Belle Isle.
This is the Verizon IndyCar Series on the Advanced Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network.
A.J. Foyt down the main straightaway.
IndyCar Radio on the IMS Radio Network.
The lead is down to 2.5 car lengths. Helio Castroneves looking for 2 in a row. Paul Tracy has him in his sights.
Oh, the qualifying struggle for Team Green, but boy, Paul Tracy looking good right now. And Greg's back in 2. Is Tracy trying to make the pass in the North Eddy? Heads toward Preston Airy. Action is on the speedway.
And Paul Tracy has made the pass. He's gotten around Castroneves. Mikey, heads your way. Paul Tracy will take the yellow flag. It looks like he will win the Indianapolis 500 as the yellow and white are displayed.
Yes, we can see him now, and he's right down to that white line on this lap, too, as he streaks through here, right up onto the back stretch, and in just a second or so.
From Belle Isle Park in Detroit, Michigan, it's time for the Verizon IndyCar Series on the Advanced Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network.
Belle Isle in Detroit, Mark James, Anders Krone set to take you through the next 45 minutes. Cloud cover starting to settle in over Belle Isle. The skies look a little interesting. Wouldn't call them threatening. We know rain is around the area, but we hope the next 45 minutes will indeed be dry. And after the initial practice session this morning before we go qualifying tomorrow, Sebastian Bourdais, P1, at a 67.8485, Scott Dixon, Graham Rahal. Rahal, of course, pulled off the sweep a year ago. Rossi, Andretti. We'll talk about young Mr. Ferrucci, who was in the top 10. Ryan Hunter-Reay, Zach Veach, Joseph Newgarden, and Tony Kanaan. Quite an interesting top 10.
Yeah, it is indeed, and especially looking at how front-loaded it was on the Honda side. So because of that, I went to the paddock to try and figure out why exactly is that, and is that a trend we're looking for, or is that just coincidence? And the rumblings I'm hearing, I can't reveal my sources here, but the rumblings I'm hearing is the fact that Chevy actually have more peak horsepower than Honda, but Honda's torque curve is a little bit more forgiving, and over the bumps here, that means that the Honda is easier to get the power down on the ground. So I think what we're going to be looking for here is potentially for a Honda lockout of the front row, kind of similar to what we saw from Chevy at Indy, where peak horsepower is a lot more important.
A couple of overruns in turn 7. We saw one car into the tire barrier. That was Renee Binder in turn number 11. But all in all, Didn't seem to be any glaring issues, maybe a couple of light taps of the wall with the left rear, but a pretty uneventful session. I think there's a massive amount of respect for the challenges at this place, and drivers know that when they head out onto the race course. This place can bite them as much as any other that we race.
And it's kind of one of those deals where you either absolutely love this place and the car is just dancing around for you, like the Graham Rahalls and the Alexander Rossis and Sebastian Bourdais, but then if you're not in the flow of things around this place, it's just terrible because the car is moving all over the place. You're not comfortable. You're being beat up inside the car. So definitely one of those places where if you're truly in one with the car, then it's a beautiful place.
A masterful job in his first year as MC of the awards banquet after the Indianapolis 500. He's with us this weekend as he is throughout most of the season. He's the sports director of the ABC affiliate, WRTV6 in Indianapolis. Congratulations, Dave. Your first time hosting and a job well done.
Well, it was fun. Yeah, it was a lot of fun handing out the big check. Some of those checks I've never actually handed out that are that big before. Those are some big-time
checks. Sizable. Yeah, a lot of zeros with some of those checks.
A lot of zeros.
Decimal points, all those.
Especially if you're Will Power handing over that check for $2.5 million. Not a bad payday to win the 2018 102nd version of the Indianapolis 500 last Sunday. But great to be back here on the streets of Belle Isle. 2 races this weekend, and the conditions going to be really interesting over the course of this 3-day weekend. Temperatures have dropped steadily today, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Air temperature at 77 degrees. Make that 25 degrees Celsius if you are listening to us. My friends up north are actually to the south of Detroit, but anyway, more on that perhaps later. Track temperature at 91 degrees Fahrenheit, 33 degrees Celsius. Humidity levels coming down to right now at 70%. There are some dark clouds, but I don't think we're in any kind of a threat for some rain here in this practice session. There are some new rain tires that might make their debut this weekend. We're going to talk to Kerry Adams from Firestone a little bit later about that, Mark.
It's interesting, Anders, as you peruse these grounds each and every year. I mean, this Free Friday is a great concept. It's great for the fans. Give them a chance to come out and see it. But, this thing continues to grow in popularity for sure. And, it's as we mentioned, it's a pretty daunting task for these race teams whose race weekends, be it testing, qualifying, or racing, go all the way back, I think, to April 6th, we were figuring out. But all in all, the overwhelming majority of folks pretty anxious to get this event underway and happy to see it come to Belle Isle. There's been some detractors of late, especially this year, but all in all, this event appears very, very healthy.
Yeah, it does indeed, and as you rightly said, it keeps growing, and I was actually walking around the fan area a little bit today, and it's just full of people, and I think they've done such a good job here of bringing all these different types of interesting series, so there's always something on track. So whether you're into the Stadium Super Trucks, into the endurance racing, or the Verizon IndyCar series, there's always something on track to keep you entertained. And speaking of getting entertained, that's exactly what Zach Veach is providing with us right now here on board his camera. And look at how free this car is. And what I really want to draw your eyes to, and if we get back to his onboard, is pay attention to how much movement there is in the front suspension. Typically, what you'll see around a road and a street course is not that much movement on the front of the car, but a lot of movement in the back of the car. And that's typically because they run the front anti-roll bar attached on road and street courses, the rear roll bar disconnected. But on this particular track, I think roughly half the teams have elected to actually disconnect both the front and the rear bar to again help with the compliance that we talked about in the previous session over all these bumps. Now, what that does is it makes the front of the car a lot more bitey, a lot more aggressive. So the drivers need to kind of do a much more of a refined job with the steering wheel because it provides so much front grip. I think Team Penske, from what I can see, they run with the front bar on, which makes the front end stiffer, which means it skates across the track a little bit more. But I think almost certainly the Andretti car is running with it off, and that's why you see them having so much front grip around this place. And if you can hang on to it, man, that's definitely going to be the quicker of the two setups, I think.
Can you massage or adjust that ride height at all? Do you need to because of the bumps here, or are you on a fine line there?
You absolutely have to, and otherwise you'll just wear the bottom of the car right off, and it's inevitable that you're gonna hit the bottom of the track. I mean, if you run it high enough to not hit it anywhere, you're basically driving a Monster Jam super truck. And so it's a fine balance of just enabling the car to touch just on the biggest bumps, but then staying clear of the ground from there on.
The seat construction is that we understand the safety features in mind and the safety elements associated with that, but the material that seat's made of and the form that they pour into the cockpit, that energy absorbing material, ultra important, ultra significant when it comes to driving on a bumpy course like this.
It's crucial, and it was something that they brought in with this new car. Remember back to, I think it was 2011 or something, when Justin Wilson went off track at Mid-Ohio.
Right.
Actually just got a little bit airborne and broke his back, and that's because he was so tall, he had to sit right on the bottom of the tub. So then the moment you bottom out, what's taking the impact? It's your spine. And so what they made mandatory with the new car is actually about a half an inch of foam underneath the driver's seat, regardless of how tall or short you are, and the same behind the back. So now there's a lot more absorption of energy when you do bottom out, and as a result, obviously, I honestly can't think that we've seen a single back injury since the introduction of this new car. So just another kind of proof in how the Verizon IndyCar Series continues to push the boundaries from safety. And around a place like this, yeah, you definitely don't want to sit on the bottom of the tub. That gets painful pretty quick.
Let's go back to pit road and Dave first.
Here with Taylor Keel, of course, helps call the shots for the 5-car James Hinchcliffe. You guys were towards the bottom in that first practice session this morning. Some brake issues?
Yeah, we had some brake issues. The car wasn't very good generally, so we struggled in the first session for sure.
Got those corrected, though, I'm assuming, right? Good to go this afternoon?
Yeah, I think so. We've changed everything but the driver, so we'll see how it goes.
Well, the driver I was talking to earlier, he had a big smile on his face. He's just happy to get back in a race car, right?
Yeah, he's happy to be here, for sure. We're happy to have him back.
This race team all told, you guys, I know, you're getting ready to go. Yep, Taylor Keel, they just fired that number 5 machine for James Hinchcliffe, so we'll see the Aero Electronic Honda out on this 2.3-mile layout. But one other note, not only did, of course, they miss the Indy 500, but in that week before the 500, the race itself, Mark James, as you hear Hinch go behind me, Lena Gade, the engineer, was also let go. So some changes with this crew, but trust me, they are looking forward to June and beyond as they try to make a push for a championship here in 2018.
And Anders, we talked about that in that session this morning, and you chalked that up just to more or less a chemistry issue.
Oh, for sure, because there's no question of her skill set as an individual engineer, and there's no question to the kind of structure of the team, certainly with the big restructure they had over the winter. It's just a matter of whether you fit in and can buy into each other's philosophies. And you know what? Sometimes everything makes perfect sense on paper, and when you actually become in a competitive situation together, you realize, no, actually, we don't believe in the same philosophies. And so it was probably a wise decision to take that opportunity, if they were going to kind of grow apart at some point, to just take this opportunity to draw a line in the sand and push on.
Nick Hillman joined us from pit road for the session this morning. Had an opportunity after the session to talk to Graham Rahal. As we mentioned, Graham was third quick. He swept the weekend a year ago. Vastly different car, vastly different set of circumstances, but the same Graham Rahal. Nick, he seemed awfully confident in his race car going into this weekend.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Awfully competitive in that opening practice session, as he was in the top 5 after it was all said and done. And I wondered about that, because you talk about all the different dynamics and the variables that go into this new aero kit, and so many of these teams that have been chasing this car to start this 2018 season. I wondered if it would transfer over coming back to Detroit, but Graham seemed to be very confident. Talked to his strategist, Ricardo Nault, during that practice session. He was blown away with just how good Graham has been. So, Anders, sometimes drivers just have a feel for a place, and clearly Graham Rahal likes Detroit quite a bit. Very successful a year ago, and that looks like it's going to continue this year.
And I'll tell you, the other thing that it does is it just gives the engineers a chance to, as we see a big wheel lift on the inside here of Will Power's car, and that's exactly to the point, we'll get back to that in a moment here, but that's exactly what we're talking about with the front bar. The moment you see a front wheel lift up like that, as we have Jordan King in the barriers here, that is a very, very stiffly front end to the car, and yeah, man, oh man, just is not easy.
Red flag is out. Jordan King has found the wall here at Belle Isle. We're going to take a look at the replay.
Yeah, and that's a very, very easy place to do that. That's turn 13, and such a fast corner. It's the last real corner before the start-finish line, and if you just miss your groove by a couple inches, you'll be outside the rubber where all the grip is. And Alexander Rossi here running wide, he touches the wall, and that's coming off of what is that? Turn 7, I want to say. So yeah, clearly, or turn 6 rather. Man, that was a big impact for
Jordan King, extremely fortunate that no one was running behind him, because after that impact with the left side, once that suspension broke, he shot directly back across the racetrack and came to rest against the inside wall, and that thing buffered quite a bit, bouncing off that wall 2 or 3 times before it finally got stopped. And it wasn't a direct hit. He had scrubbed off a lot of speed, but still a pretty decent impact on both sides of that race car.
Yeah, it is indeed. But what I'm worried about with looking at his car here is if he did some damage to the gearbox, because the way he hit with the left rear, I wouldn't be surprised if that drive shaft got essentially pushed straight into the gearbox. So wouldn't be surprised if it's going to be larger repairs than may be apparent at the moment.
Well, for those of you that might have the screen minimized, not watching the video, happy to report he's out of the car talking to the safety crew as we speak. So a red flag on the course, single car incident involving Jordan King. Practice session number 2 continues here on the streets of Belle Isle.
Firestone presents Legendary Drives. Super speedways, short ovals, dry tracks, wet tracks, concrete or asphalt. The IndyCar Series is the ultimate test for a driver. And being a driver that can adapt to anything means having a tire that can do the same. That's why we build Firestone tires to handle it all. Because if they can endure all that, well, you can bet they'll bring you to victory every day. Whatever you drive, drive a Firestone, the tire that drives IndyCar legends.
From the Firestone broadcast booth at Belle Isle, this is the Verizon IndyCar Series.
Mark James, Anders Krohn, Nick Yeoman in the broadcast booth, and we are under a red flag situation as Jordan King has found the wall just shy of pit road, the entrance to pit road, and they're trying to get that car extricated from that inside wall. Let's hear from the team owner. Finished second a week ago in the Indy 500, Ed Carpenter.
That's right, Ed Carpenter. Just a little while ago, you were in the cockpit in the Indianapolis 500, finished second. Now back up on the pit box as team owner once again. First of all, what did you hear from Jordan surrounding the accident?
I mean, not much. He didn't say much before he got out. Just said kind of got away from him in 13. So unfortunate, with this condensed schedule, it's a pretty big setback this weekend. Looks like it got all 4 corners. So, on the 20 car, we'll just have to rely on what the 21 comes up with for the rest of today, heading into tomorrow, because this is the last practice for qualifying and racing. So puts us back in a tough situation, but we've been here before. We'll just have to rebound tomorrow with that car.
How had the weekend been going prior to the contact?
It was going okay. I mean, this is a really difficult track to come to for the first time, so losing track time like this is a big loss, but it's the way it goes sometimes.
For you, how hard is it to switch gears from driver mode to owner mode?
It's pretty normal. I mean, I've been in this role since 2014, so the schedule hasn't changed much since then. The cadence is about the same, so it's a normal.
Great run last weekend, Ed. Appreciate the time, and I believe that day first has the driver himself, Jordan King.
Yeah, brought back to the pit area here for the 20 car, Fuzzy's Vodka machine for Ed Carpenter Racing. Okay, tell us what happened.
So just coming into the last corner and just lost the rear, got a bit of a snap on the rear. It wasn't a big thing, but by the time I'd caught the car, I was then too wide, and then the wall is obviously right there. So really annoying because it was a tiny error, but it was quite costly.
It looks like maybe all 4 corners are banged up on that car.
Don't know about that, but yeah, unfortunately, when we touched the wall, it broke the left rear, which then I've then gone across the circuit into the other side. So yeah, it's hit both sides of the car, which is annoying.
What did you make the time you were out there this morning and now today? How difficult is this race course?
I feel like we've got a good feel of it so far. We got to speed quite quickly. That felt better then. Obviously annoyed at the small mistake, but overall it feels like we're in the right place.
It's a bumpy road course, though, that street course, I guess.
Yes, yeah, very bumpy.
Have you experienced anything like that? I mean, we've been at St. Pete and Long Beach, but does this compare to those two?
It's different. Every street circuit's different. So, yes, it's bumpy, but in different ways.
Glad you're okay.
Thank you.
Jordan King back here in the pit stall and going to have a good talk with Ed Carpenter and company before they head back out for qualifying tomorrow.
And still, Mark James, he just doesn't seem fazed about it, does he?
No.
I mean, not frazzled one bit. He's just like, yeah, it's a bit annoying.
Which makes him a good fit for Ed Carpenter.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost crazy. I think if that was me, I'd be pretty worked up, but fair play to the guy.
Well, and unfortunately, as you heard Ed say, it cost him valuable track time, about 30 minutes, in fact. But I think more importantly, it makes it an awfully long night for that crew before we go qualifying tomorrow.
Yeah, it does indeed. And I wouldn't be surprised, like I said, if there's not more damage than just the four corners. Wouldn't be surprised if there's a gearbox there where the drive shaft's been pushed in. So hopefully for them, they'll be able to turn it around. Luckily, they're not on track till 11 a.m. tomorrow morning, so that's a good thing at least.
Well, and two, being a multi-car team, you have Spencer Pigot, and let's hope that you know their setups are somewhat similar, because you heard Ed reference the prospects of maybe putting Spencer's setup on the car, and while certainly that makes sense, that doesn't always mean that those things blend.
No, absolutely, and that's obviously what the big benefit that some of these bigger car teams have. You know, the Penske's with 3 and the Andretti's with 4 cars, and certainly helps them gather data at a way faster rate than some of the smaller teams. And so now they're a car down. Now they're essentially to where Graham Rahal was last year, and well, that worked out pretty well for him, didn't it?
You know, it's interesting you talk about multi-car teams, Nick Yeoman. I was at an event prior to the 500 with Brian Barnhart, who now heads up Harding Racing, and he said he was talking with his team owner, Mike Harding, back at St. Petersburg, and they were standing in the paddock after a practice session, and Mike said, okay, I know there are differences, but specifically can you point to the difference between Penske Racing and Harding Racing, for instance? And he said, as luck would have it at that time, he said all 3 Penske cars were coming back to the paddock, and he said I pointed to the shock positionings on their car, and all 3 cars each had different shock positions on them, and he said, see, they're able to do in one session what it takes us 2, maybe 3 sessions to do.
Well, and think about how that compounds on a day like today, where after the first practice session we had a couple red flags, very disjointed, hard for drivers to get any clean laps in, and now we're working another red flag for a massive cleanup after this accident. So if you're a one-car team and you've only got 2 practice sessions before we go qualifying, and then these 2 practice sessions are very disjointed with red flags, it's incredibly tough to get that data you need to dial in these setups, which any engineer you talk to up and down pit lane says this is a really challenging track to figure it out. Dave Faustino, I talked to him. He's the Indy 500 race-winning engineer with Will Power, and he said, man, this is just a tough spot because there's certain parts of this racetrack, Anders, that you kind of have to sacrifice knowing that you might not be very good at because it's so challenging. And to Mark's point, if you're a one-car team and you can only try one setup at a time, boy, you're facing an uphill battle.
I tell you, the only time when it's good being a one-car team is when you offload from the trailer and the car is near perfect, because that means you have less information to confuse yourself. And oftentimes, I'm pretty certain that's what happens to some of these big teams, is they'll get all this information and they say, well, that car looked really good in that corner. Let's take a little bit of that setup and a little bit of that setup. And then you end up with a setup that actually overall might not be as good and as pure as the original setup. So but that is also the only time when being a single car team is better. But 9 times out of 10, certainly a multi-car team can have a big advantage.
Well, the skies looked threatening for a while, but now all of a sudden, sunshine has returned to the course here at Belle Isle, and we talked about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and how ultra-sensitive it is to the conditions in terms of the wind and certainly the sunlight and shade, and how it can change so dramatically as it did throughout the course of the race as cloud cover moved in on race day a week ago. What about a place like this? As sensitive?
Much less so here. Obviously, again, also because this is partially shaded by all the grandstands and all the different trees around, so much less susceptible to wind here. I think the biggest thing and the biggest challenge is for the teams here is with the reduction in downforce, we're seeing a way bigger delta at this track than any other track so far this season. Currently, 4 seconds off pole position from last year, so a huge delta. And again, if you don't have that downforce to really push the tires into the ground as you go over these bumps, then yeah, you lose a lot of time. And I think that's partially I really like that here because the cars are moving around so much, and I think it's very visually impactful.
From 92 to 2001, this was a kart race. Elio won it a couple of times. Other winners here were Dario Franchitti, Alex Zerardi, the late Greg Moore, Michael Andretti, Robbie Gordon, Paul Tracy, Danny Sullivan, and Bobby Rahal all won here. The IRL ran here in 2007 and 2008. Justin Wilson, Tony Kanaan were winners. Then the IndyCar Series resumed in 2012 and has enjoyed some multiple winners. I mean, Bourdais won it twice. Powers won it twice. We mentioned Rahal swept a year ago, but Carlos Munoz got his win here. Elio Castroneves, Pagenaud, Mike Conway, Scott Dixon among the winners here. So it's built a pretty decent history, and obviously an impressive list of names have gotten to victory lane.
It is, and it's because it's so challenging to win around here. Everything needs to go right, driving-wise as well as car-wise, and it's just one of those places where if you have the car nailed and you're feeling comfortable around here, you're okay with the car throwing you around and bumping you and beating you up in the car. But yeah, if you're uncomfortable and if you're apprehensive about anything in the car, brakes especially, to Taylor Kyle's interview earlier, I mean, if you have brake issues around a place like this, oh man, there's no way you'll be able to push the boundaries because it gives you zero confidence.
And with that grip having been affected and the downforce being having been affected, Nick, let's face it, the spot on the course that you have, the entrance to turn 7 has been troublesome enough, and we did see a couple of instances where guys got into the runoff area and missed that turn in the session this morning.
Yeah, one to be in particular was Robert Wickens, who tried to woe that car down into turn number 7. It's that long back straightaway before you've got that hard 90-degree right-hand turn, as we see Zach Veach kind of navigating that part of the racetrack right now. And it is, Mark, I mean, with that reduced downforce, all of a sudden it becomes a little bit harder to get those cars slowed down on those heavy braking zones. And the other thing that I've noticed, Mark, you think about it, Renee Bender put it in the tire barriers, Robert Wickens got off track, Jordan King now with a big accident. All rookie drivers, and this being a temporary street circuit, this is always a race weekend, Anders, that I think favorites the veterans, and so far we're seeing this racetrack reach out and grab and bite a couple of these runners.
Yeah, and I think that's just because they know how much this course changes as the rubber goes down, and just how easy it is to get caught out and kind of get overzealous in a brake zone if you're frustrated with someone ahead of you or someone doing something silly. So yeah, I think it's I couldn't agree any more with you. Experience around a place like this is crucial from a race management perspective, but also just in knowing exactly where all the different bumps are and everything. And even the veterans. Actually, I just got a question on Twitter from today's Sam asking if I can explain what the little piece of equipment is that's blocking the Penske camera. And that's actually Team Penske's own GoPro camera that they put on the cars to review every little bit of what the drivers are doing. So they'll actually go in, they'll overlay these videos with each other and see the exact line differences between each driver. And keep in mind, all the Penske drivers have been here year on, year out, but still they download this video and look at it and figure exactly out, okay, where is he line-wise? Is Simon doing something differently from Joseph or Will in one corner, and why is he doing it differently, and is that quicker or slower? So that they'll keep doing that for every single session.
And the good news is, for those that are going to tune in and watch, they remove those cameras for the race, so you'll have that full view of the driver's hands and everything. But yeah, it's a great way to gather data during the practice.
And frankly, every team and driver do it. We're looking on board now with Marco Andretti, and that little round thing you see just below the camera, that's a replay XD camera that they have. So all the teams and drivers certainly using cameras.
Well, we mentioned he's a former winner here. He's a former winner in a lot of places, namely the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where he won 3 times. Pure Sportsman continues to be an ambassador for motorsports as a whole. Dave, first you've caught up with Dario Franchitti.
Yeah, of course, Chip Ganassi Racing has put him to work the last couple of years as he's now, I guess, a bit of a driver's coach, if you will, for Ed Jones, who's in that NTT data machine for Chip Ganassi Racing. We were just talking about former champions here. Hard to believe it's almost been 19 years since you won here.
Montoya and I were just talking about that yesterday. Has that been 19 years? Oh, time.
What the heck, man?
Time flies when you're having fun, right?
Well, I'll be asking you this. I mean, a lot of people have talked about how these cars, the way they handle, mimic perhaps the old kart days, the old champ car days. You were involved in that. Any similarities at all, Dario?
I don't know. I think the guys to ask are obviously guys like Tony and Scott, who drove those cars back in the back in the kart days, whether they do it or not. They look a handful from where I'm sitting. It looks like a lot of fun to drive it, and with the bumps around here in Detroit, it definitely rewards the drivers that are willing to take risks and also get the car working on the bumps.
Does being a veteran at this place, I mean, it helps wherever you go, obviously, but perhaps even more so at this place?
I think understanding the way the track changes, what you can and can't get away with, certainly helps the veterans a bit more. I think with some of the rookies, they maybe just don't know any better, and then it tends to bite them a bit. But there's definitely some very talented rookies out there, as well as you watch what the veterans do, and there's a reason they're up there, and they've continued to have a job year after year. It's because they're bloody good.
You always liked this place, didn't you?
Oh, I love this track. Yeah, I enjoyed racing here from the first time I came here in '97 to the last time in 2013. I had a lot of fun, and it was always a challenge. Speaking of veterans, I see Tony Kanaan in the tire patio there.
So much for that veteran thing, right?
Yeah, that kind of went a bit wrong. I guess he was probably. Here we go. Yeah.
Tony Kanaan, back in comes around.
Yeah, he locked the outside front as he turned in and got caught out there.
Hey, let me ask you one last thing, as obviously all the cars are now making their way back to pit lane here. Tell me about Ed Jones's season so far. How has his development progressed?
Obviously, the podium in Long Beach was fantastic. He was looking good for another podium in Phoenix and made a mistake. Very, very close to the end of the race, and again at Indy last week, there was probably he maybe just caught the curb, which unsettled the car, and we saw the result. But he's pushing really hard, and he works hard. He learns. He's a talented guy. So as the season goes on, I expect the results to get better and better.
I must say, though, without Tony Kanaan in the engineer meetings, I'm guessing those are a little different nowadays.
Yeah, there's a bit less talking from the driver's side of things, a bit more detail, but it was always fun to have Tony. And we still go out to dinner, Dixie, myself, Tony, because it's just so entertaining to have him hanging around.
Thanks for the chat.
Thanks, Dave.
Have a great weekend. Dario Franchitti has Ed Jones in that bright blue number 10 machine for Chip Ganassi Racing. Has made his way back to pit road. In the meantime, though, Tony Kanaan remains out on the race course, guys.
Have you had a chance to look at TK's off in turn 7?
Yeah, it's actually very, very similar to what we saw Zach Veach narrowly avoid just moments before, and it's just that kind of coming in a little bit too deep, you lock up a wheel, and basically what happens is the moment you're outside where the line of rubber runs, you have zero grip whatsoever, and so the natural cause is you're going to keep putting steering wheel input, trying to get the car to turn, and suddenly the front grips up and just sends the rear right around. So yeah, that is that's probably going to happen a lot this weekend, I think.
So just a few minutes remaining in this session. Clock continues to tick. Red flag situation, single car incident involving Tony Kanaan. Alexander Rossi has moved to the top, have a couple of drivers in that 66 range now, most notably Rossi and Will Power. Rossi at 66, 79, 61 at 86.47 for Will Power. Robert Wickens, James Hinchcliffe, Takuma Sato, the top 5. Chilton, Hunter Ray, Dixon, Pagano, and Piggott, the top 10 here at Belle Isle.
Firestone presents Legendary Drives. The scariest thing in sports is a left turn, taking it over 220 miles an hour. Turn 1 at the Indy 500 demands everything a tire's got, putting 2.5 G's on them for 4 seconds. Once it's over, they only have to do it 199 more times. And if Firestone tires are so dependable they can handle turn 1, they'll handle any turn you need to make. Whatever you drive, drive a Firestone, the tire that drives IndyCar legends.
From the Firestone broadcast booth at Belle Isle, this is the Verizon IndyCar Series.
We don't waste any time getting down to the nitty-gritty. Tomorrow, June the 2nd, Verizon IndyCar Series qualifying session 1 at 10:55 Eastern. It'll run till approximately 11:25 as we'll set the field for the first half of the doubleheader, which is set for 3 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. For those of us that grew up in central Indiana and have been fans of short track racing, you qualify and you race all in one day, and that's the way it's going to be here Saturday and Sunday, Anders, for the Verizon IndyCar Series.
I really like that format. I think it's great. Less track time is actually, in my opinion, it's better. It forces you to really be on your game, loading off the trailer. It also forces the teams and drivers to be a little more aggressive with their strategy as they offload, because they know they don't have all that track time to kind of slowly but surely get up to speed. So overall, I think it's a great thing.
Let's head to pit road, check in with Ryan Marine. Ryan?
Thank you, Mark. It looks like, as we're about to get cars back out on the racetrack, a number of these teams, including Matthias Lace, who you hear pull out right behind me, have elected to bolt on the Firestone red tires, which leads me to believe this could be an opportunity to try for some qualifying simulation runs here. Anders, perhaps you can weigh in on this a little bit more, but with track time at a premium, certainly starting position important at this racetrack. They've spent a good deal of this practice on the blacks so far, but a lot of these teams electing to go to the reds right now.
Yeah, and just before we went red there, Alexander Rossi did a run on the Firestone Reds, did a 1:16.79, but Power, who's now out on the Firestone Reds, had done a 1:16.86 there on the blacks, but now Power is out on the Firestone Reds, so it'll be interesting to see just how much he improves here, and actually quite surprising there that Rossi wasn't able to go quicker than that on the Firestone Reds, but maybe the delta between the two isn't as great as we had all thought.
Revisit some of our points from this morning and reassessing his dominant month of May at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He took the IndyCar Grand Prix, followed that up with a win at the Indianapolis 500. We documented where he stands now in terms of consecutive seasons with at least one win, consecutive seasons with more than one win. His overall win total, the 3 years that he was the runner-up in the championship and the championship that he won. And certainly this all solidifies Will Power, not only among the best of all time in open-wheel racing, but certainly now among the best that Roger Penske's ever employed. And that's pretty heady company.
Yeah, absolutely, no question. And obviously it's crazy to think that he's been racing for them for the better part of a decade, and still this was his first Indy 500 win. But I think this win probably meant more to him than the championship did, to be honest. I really could see that kind of, as Connor Daly at the banquet alluded to, seeing the craziness in his eyes as he just went absolutely ballistic about this win. So I definitely think he's going to go down in the history books as one of the greatest all time, certainly for both Penske and in IndyCar in general.
More on Will Power in just a moment. We need to maybe put the wraps on the single car incident involving Tony Kanaan. Dave First will do that for us.
Yeah, Tony Kanaan obviously brought back here, made his way back to pit road. The ABC Supply guys pouring over that machine. It looks like they've got a little bit of suspension damage on that left rear. Otherwise, the left front looks pretty good. They did exchange out that rear wing assembly, so they put on a new rear wing. They're taking care of that left rear suspension, but I would expect to see Tony Kanaan back out here maybe the next 10-15 minutes or so, guys.
About 11 minutes remaining in this session, in fact. We see Ryan Hunter-Reay now has gone P1, so clearly after the practice session this morning, in which Ryan Hunter-Reay was among the top 10, that car is unloaded pretty fast.
Yeah, it is for sure, and that's a 4/10 delta there to Alexander Rossi, so I wonder if the red flag just came out right when Rossi was on a flyer, because he's back out on the same set of reds that he was on the previous run. So be interesting to see if he can improve here. But getting a good view on board at the moment, actually, with Alexander Rossi. And again, I just keep coming back to the suspension shots. Look at the amount of movement there is in the front of his car. And then if we go to the car of Will Power, if we get an onboard shot of his car, pay attention to how much less movement there is in the front suspension. Again, that's kind of a telltale sign that Alexander Rossi and Andretti Autosport have opted to disconnect the front anti-roll bar, whereas it is connected on the Penske car.
Hunter-Reay, Andretti, Rahal, Rossi, and Power, the top five. You see Graham Rahal sneaking into the top five now. Power sixth. Wiggins, Hitch, Sato, and Chilton as we go back to pit road and Dave First.
An opportunity to catch up with Kara Adams, Chief Engineer, Bridgestone Americas Motorsports. Of course, Firestone always at the forefront of innovation. Just announced and unveiled their new rain tire for the Verizon IndyCar Series. First time in 3 years, an all-new tread pattern for this. Now, keep in mind, we're in radio. Kind of explain what's happening here.
So this is a really exciting opportunity for us to introduce technology that was developed with passenger tires in mind, but introduce it in the grueling demands of IndyCar racing first.
So you've got tire treads that are dependent on where explain this a little bit better.
Yeah.
I can do.
No worries. I think you can do a great job of explaining. They're very different. So the left front looks different than the right front. They're asymmetric and directional. So what that means is we can take advantage of the camber that the cars run and make sure we have the long grooves around where the pattern is. So with a cambered tire, you can have long grooves where you have braking and accelerating, and then wide grooves where you do a lot of cornering. So it makes a nice, smooth transition. It's better for hydroplaning, and it'll give the teams a little bit more pattern stiffness in drying conditions.
And I know it's a cliche, but the technology you guys are putting into this tire, maybe one day soon, you and I will be able to drive.
That's the really cool thing about this, Dave. What we've done in the past is looked at rain patterns and how do we make them match passenger tires. So if you go out to your Firestone store, you see a tire, we end up putting that on the track. But in this case, we actually engineered the tread pattern solely for the demands of what we see in IndyCar, but we think we may end up transferring that to what you put in a Bridgestone or Firestone passenger tire.
This is really cool stuff. Ideally, though, we don't see them this weekend, or in a weird little way, do you kind of want to see them out on a rain slick course?
Well, I'd love for our fans to be able to stay dry and really enjoy the race weekend, but the engineer in me wants it to rain a little bit. I'll be honest.
All right. How's everybody after the Indy 500, by the way? Everybody rested up, good to go now?
Yeah, I think we had a day or two back in the office where we could reset a little bit. A couple people took a couple days of well-deserved vacation, so maybe a little bit tired still here, but we're enjoying this season.
Good stuff. Enjoy the race weekend. We'll talk to you tomorrow, okay?
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Again, Kara Adams, who, of course, is the chief engineer, Bridgestone America's Motorsports, down here on Pit Road.
You know, Anders, bottom line is this. You hear, talk about, maybe another chassis manufacturer at some point, maybe a third engine manufacturer, and on and on and on. I don't know if too many tire manufacturers would seem willing to step up and take on the juggernaut that is Firestone. I can't remember the last time, if ever, in my time covering this, that there was a failure related to construction.
Yeah, no, and I know it almost sounds like a PR plug every time a driver says it, but it genuinely is true. I remember driving on the Firestone tire in Indy Lights and specifically remember to the Grand Prix of Long Beach, where every single lap in the race was essentially a qualifying lap. And the only reason why you're able to do that is, A, the tire has good grip, but B, you as a driver know that the tire isn't going to, fail in construction or anything like that. And I can honestly say I can't think of any other tire manufacturer that has that ability to make these tires that work for road courses, street courses, ovals, and just put the beating on them that they do. I mean, it really is mighty impressive. And so I think for that, I think it's very daunting for another tire manufacturer to even look at coming in, because they would look at that and say, how do they get that performance out of the tires and still kind of keep the quality up? And it really is impressive. So yeah, exactly to your point, I think it'd be difficult to topple Firestone.
It's only happened a handful of times since road and street course racing came back to this open wheel flag. But I think one of the most compelling situations for me, especially from a strategic standpoint, is maybe when we have started in the wets and the track has started to dry, and teams being forced to make that call at the right time because there's still a portion of the track that's wet, or maybe vice versa. I mean, we start dry and then some rain comes and they got to make that call. That really adds a very exciting element, I think, to the strategy.
Well, we saw it at Barber Motorsports Park with a guy in the shot. I mean, Sebastian Bourdais rolling the dice on staying out on slicks and going for, a crazy fuel strategy as well. And it almost paid off. It was just a matter of, had it rained a little bit less, he would have stayed out and probably won that race. And Joseph Newgarden, who had dominated the entire weekend, probably would have only ended up second. So I completely agree with you. So if it was up to me, we'd be out here with a garden hose just kind of wetting the track before the start of every race.
So now, for those that may not understand how a day unfolds in teams in terms of what a team plans, as we see James Hinchcliffe in the runoff area. And by the way, going into turn number 7, Will Power missed that runoff area and was weaving his way through it and was blocked momentarily by a photographer that I think was a little surprised to see an IndyCar parked right behind him.
Well, it was kind of cool because he slalomed his way through those tire barriers, and then he ended up at the outside of turn 11 where he rejoined the track. So I think he was having to avoid a couple of pickup trucks, a couple of safety crews out there. So that was actually quite humorous to watch. But turn 7 is turning into the St. Pete turn 4 and the Long Beach turn 8, 9. And look, here we have Sebastian Bourdais.
Yeah.
Off in the same corner. So, yeah, it's the exact same thing. There's that one corner that just kind of sticks out as the difficult one, and especially now with everyone on the Firestone alternates on those red tires. Yeah, they're pushing the boundaries, and it's so easy to lock up the wheels here.
So let's talk a little bit about why we would see James Hinchcliffe toward the bottom of timing and scoring, and then all of a sudden we come back this afternoon and he's P3. Does it have something to do with that red ring around those tires during this practice session that maybe we didn't see this morning?
No, not really, because I think everyone's been on the Firestone Red, so I think it's more just the fact that they have a handle on the brakes now, and again, around a street course like this, if you're not confident in the brakes, you're hopeless. You are going to be just dead slow. So that's the number one thing, and we've seen them. Their setup, actually, St. Pete and Long Beach on the street courses, they have a great street course car, so it's no surprise to see them at the pointy end of the field.
It looks as though that Andretti Autosports has kind of unloaded overall in pretty good shape here. I mean, you've got Ryan Hunter-Reay, P1. Marco is 5th quick. Zach Veach is backing up a top 10 run. He's currently 10th quick after being 8th quick, so it looks like they're in pretty good shape off the truck.
And kind of it brings us back to one of the key areas of the Verizon IndyCar Series. With the Universal Aero Kits, it's closed in the regulations so much, but the one area where the teams can do whatever they want is in the shocks. And that was kind of Andretti's downfall for at least the last few years on the street and road courses, is whenever they came to a bumpy track, they would struggle. But I think in Toronto last year, something happened, something clicked for them, and since then they've been super strong on all types of tracks. So yeah, clearly just continuing that trend there for Andretti Autosport, and this is looking good.
And Nick Yeoman, as you pointed out several minutes ago, it looks as though the Honda as a whole seemed to have a pretty good grasp on Belle Isle.
Yeah, this of course is the Chevrolet Detroit Grand Prix. Chevrolet the title sponsor, but right now it's the Honda camp that looks pretty strong. As of right now, Mark, with everybody kind of working on qualifying sims, 9 of the top 11 sporting that Honda H on the front of those race cars. The only 2 Chevrolets, the predictable ones. Team Penske's Joseph Newgarden in 4th and Simon Pagenaud in 7th. But up and down that timing and scoring chart, Anders, a lot of Honda drivers looking pretty strong here in practice, too.
And I think that just kind of comes back to the different torque curves of the engines and the fact that the consensus that I've been able to gather anyway is that the Chevy has more peak power, but that's very difficult to put down to the ground here because it is so bumpy and because it is such a low grip surface. So that means every time you hit the power, you'll get a little bit of wheel spin, whereas the power delivery of the Honda is maybe a little bit more linear. It doesn't have quite as much outright horsepower, but just the delivery of it enables them to get the power down to the ground a little bit more effectively. And so I definitely think, and so because of that, the Chevy teams now have to compensate for that with their mechanical setup on the cars to do whatever they can to allow those tires to just grip into the surface as well as possible.
Just about a minute left in this final practice session before we go qualifying tomorrow. Ryan Hunter-Reay is P1, Dixon, Hinch, Newgarden, and Andretti, the top 5. Rahal, Pagenaud, Rossi, Wickens, and Veach, the top 10. Bourdais, Powers, Sato, Chilton, and Kanaan through 15th. Biggett 16th, 17th Jones, 18th Ferrucci, 19th Chavez, 10th Kimball, or 20th Kimball we should say, 21st Mateus Laced, 22nd Jordan King, and 23rd Renee Binder. Nick Yeoman thoughts turn back to the battle for the championship, and what a month it was for Will Power in May, 10th in points going into the month. He finds himself 2 points ahead of Alexander Rossi, now Joseph Newgarden 8 points back. Scott Dixon is 25 back, and this needs to be a good weekend for Ryan Hunter-Reay, who's 57 back, Rahal 60, Wickens 65, and Bourdais 75.
Yeah, think about the massive amount of points that have been online in the past 8 days, in an 8-day span, with the double points for the Indy 500 and now 2 full points-paying races here in Detroit. These 8 days are really going to make or break this championship. You're right, with Will Power's unbelievable month of May, he jolted himself all the way to P1. Alexander Rossi, Joseph Newgarden, Scott Dixon right there knocking on the door. And to prevent that from being just a 4-horse race as we transition to the second half of the season, you're right, Mark, it's an important weekend. And for some of those Honda drivers, that's why I think they're going to like what they see with Ryan Hunter-Reay 5th in points at P1. Obviously, the Robert Wickens, Graham Rahal, Sebastian Bourdais, drivers that maybe didn't have the greatest month of May. they've got an opportunity here with a pair of races to get right back in the championship hunt.
We have seen it as we documented over the years that Will Power has won multiple races and consecutive race wins year in and year out. For whatever the reason, regardless of how the season starts, when the temperature heats up, so does Will Power.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, but this is an interesting situation coming into this weekend because, Anders, since we started running double headers here in Detroit in 2012, the Indy 500 winner hasn't won a race. The Indy 500 winner hasn't even ended up on the podium.
However, Takuma Sato did come in here to Detroit and have his best qualifying finish at Detroit ever in third, so it's not impossible to think that adrenaline that you had from the 500 still carries you, but undoubtedly, I can only imagine how Takuma and now Will felt coming into this event, an event that beats you up and breaks you down just by virtue of how the track is laid out, but then to top that with 4 or 5 days straight of media advance after media advance, oh man.
How many hours of sleep do you think Will Power got all told in the past couple of weeks? I mean, it's probably...
Well, it's probably at least 3 hours a night, which I've heard is all you need.
And I think it's an inconvenience that anyone in that paddock will gladly tolerate.
Oh, for sure. You want to show up to this race weekend absolutely spent.
Yeah, no question. And that's exactly the way Will Power is. But finely tuned athletes for sure, and I'm sure he'll rebound nicely throughout the course of this weekend. So now tomorrow. Do you think people play around with the blacks and the reds a little bit? We see a handful of guys try to do it each and every year, and at the very least try to get in the round of 12 because the significance and the importance of track position.
It is so crucial. So I think you need to go all out in qualifying. And again, as we saw, St. Pete, Long Beach, the other street courses this year, qualifying is crucially important, and no one really knows if they're going to be in or out. So I think you have to do whatever is going to get you into the group of 12 and then into the group of 6 for sure.
And here's another thing to think about. Clearly, the red tires are going to be the choice to have. During the first practice session, Sebastian Bourdais led all drivers at a minute 17.854. We see a lot of drivers switch to the reds, Anders, nearly a second and a half faster. So I don't think there's going to be nearly as much tire strategy in qualifying. You're going to want to get on those reds and turn those ideal laps early on.
You 100% are, and it'll be interesting to see just how long they last as well, because that could play into the race strategy and could be one of those situations where you start on a set of reds, then you take those as long as you can, then do a short middle stint on the blacks, and then you run reds to the end of the race. So, I think we have a lot to look forward to tomorrow.
Not going to be able to talk to drivers. They are still in the car. 20 minutes worth of pit stop practice, which is not only beneficial for the teams, but it puts on a pretty good show for the fans, a little value-added element to a Verizon IndyCar Series weekend. And before we go, we do want to congratulate you for trending on Twitter this morning after referencing a constipation in our show. You've come up with a new motorsports term. I talked to the guys in race control, and they think that they're actually going to use that in the race tomorrow, Anders. So job well done.
If that is the only thing I bring to the motorsports community for my entire lifetime, I guess it would have been a lifetime well served.
I think our network director, Wally Levitt, is on the phone with our marketing department as we speak. We think there's some sponsorship opportunities in the not-too-distant future for you there.
Bring it on.
Yeah, good stuff for sure. A busy day tomorrow for us. We'll go qualifying at 10:55 Eastern, and then have race number 1 at 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll have, of course, Nick Yeoman, Jake Query out on the course. Michael Young will join us tomorrow, along with Ryan Marine and Dave First on pit road. Yours truly and Anders Krohn will be in the broadcast booth. So until then, Ryan Hunter-Ray is who they're chasing at time of 1:16.3598. The director of the Advanced Auto Parts IndyCar Radio Network is Wally Levitt. On-site engineering and production by Rick Evans. Great job by Ryan Marine and Dave First on pit road. For Anders Krohn, I'm Mark James. So long for now from Belle Isle.
This is IndyCar Radio on the IMS Radio Network.
White flag is in the hands of Paul Blevins. He's waiting to see Alexander Rossi come out of turn number 4. Tom Hansing is in the stand with him, but there he goes. And he may be out of fuel. Pankey's very slow in turn 1.
He is indeed. It doesn't sound like he's underpowered. Left side wheels below the white line. Now with the short two now in turn 2. He may be done.
That car rolls through turn number 2, and it is under power. He has backed it down big time. Here comes Carlos Munoz and Joseph Newgarden. They're running second and third. Jake Query Rossi still the leader, but he's backed the pace down.
Alexander Rossi, the rookie out of California, is backing up the pace. Carlos Munoz charging. Alexander Rossi into turn number 4 on cue.
You can also race in a simulator. Act like you're one of the Verizon IndyCar Series drivers racing along the streets of Detroit. You can also get your very own Firestone tattoo, right here in the fan zone, located just behind the Chevy Bridge.
You know, I've decided Katie's having way too much fun. She gets to go to all the fun places around the racetrack.
Yeah, but we're cool.
We
in
are.
more ways than one.
We do. Yep, we've got a lot of it here. To keep us cool here today. You've seen the cars go out. What they'll do is they'll come out, and they'll do what they're doing now, is they'll come back into the pits, stop in their pit box, and go through what they would call a pit stop. See, the guys sitting around waiting to jump in. And what's different is the cars on right now are being serviced. The fuel's going in on the right side of the race car, where last weekend it was the left side. Of course, at the Indianapolis Grand Prix, been a long day, they went on the right side. So it's kind of changing back and forth, getting everybody back adjusted a little bit. It's not that they don't practice this, and they're doing pit stops. And, gosh, I remember when it took them like a minute, and now they're doing it in just under double-digit seconds to get the cars in and out, get 4 tires changed, get the fuel in, drop it, and get it going again. It is just amazing work at what these pit crews do.
Well, of course, the legend had had it for a long time that the pit stops took a big step forward because the Wood brothers were brought in 1965 at the Indianapolis 500 to crew the car of Jimmy Clark. That Lotus, they had been kind of done in by pit stops previous to that. They did Grand Prix pit stops, which were either very slow or not necessary or whatever. So they brought the Wood brothers in. Well, there were other people who were probably as quick as the Wood brothers there. I just think it made everybody kind of up their game as far as pit stops went. And part of it comes down to technology as well. Back 50 years ago, they had the knockoffs that you had to hit with a hammer. Now you're dealing with the impact wrenches and things like that. So it is very, very quick to be able to get your car serviced. And we talked about it earlier. If you have to have your front nose and wing assembly replaced, that takes just seconds as well.
Yeah, they've got it all down, and the Wood brothers were innovative with the air guns, figuring those out. Also, the Venturi effect to get the fuel out of the tanks, worked on that. It's very interesting what they talk about and how they kind of worked around those things and really started changing things. The way we looked at pit stops. So they actually built the things themselves, which was absolutely, I've talked to them a couple of times, had a chance to interview them and talk to them, and you just sit there and listen to history coming out of them. It's just great to do. These guys are working on what they want to do, get their cars set, because pit stops are going to be absolutely critical for them this weekend. And you get some track position. Is it the way they pitch? Do the yellows fall at the right time when you need them? Going to be a lot of strategy played in this race.
Yeah, one of the things is that the pit stops are so important in so many different ways. From my seats at the 500, Zach Veach's car actually went up in flames a couple of times, and then the third time after, or the first time it came in after those two incidents, they were able to get the car fueled, tires changed, everything okay, and a huge ovation then from the crowd as he got back onto the race course. But right now, not a whole lot of action as we await to see what is going to transpire over this final few minutes of the pit stop practice. So they're really not going out there and working for speed because they're not going to be able to get a whole lap in, no necessary for that. But they'll go out there, they will get up to speed, bring it around, and try for the pit stop. So right now, things are in kind of a hold situation here.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? Inclement weather, including lightning and or high winds, is in the vicinity of the Grand Prix in Belle Isle. All events at the Grand Prix venue have been temporarily suspended until the inclement weather passes through the area. Please begin to evacuate the venue in Belle Isle by moving to the shuttle transportation loading area in a calm and orderly fashion and take the shuttle system back to your car on the mainland. After the storm clears, we'll work with local media outlets as well as our social media channels to communicate that Grand Prix events will be resumed. Once today's activities are resumed, you'll be permitted to re-enter with your ticket stub from today and return to your seats. Again, inclement weather, including lightning and or high winds, is in the vicinity of the Grand Prix in Belle Isle. All events at the Grand Prix venue have been temporarily suspended until the inclement weather passes through the area. Please begin to evacuate the venue and Belle Isle by moving to the shuttle transportation loading area in a calm and orderly fashion and take the shuttle system back to your car on the mainland. After the storm clears, we will work with local media outlets as well as our social media channels to communicate that Grand Prix events will be resumed. Once today's activities are resumed, you'll be permitted to re-enter with your ticket stub from today and return to your seats. Of course, this is also free pre-day. We thank you for your cooperation, and we will keep you posted on any further information. Thank you.